Well, thank you all for joining us for a special edition of the American Mind podcast. We're recording it on Zoom as well. We wanted to use this weird election week or two as it rolls through. A target of opportunity came across. We got in touch through a mutual connection with Matt Braynard, who was the data chief for the 2016 Trump campaign and has found himself in the quickly stood up role of evaluating some of this data of possible voter fraud in many of the key states. So I'm joined with by my colleague, Spencer Klavan, associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books and the American Mind. Thanks for joining us, Matt.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So just give us some background, if you would. First of all, I mean, just quickly what you did before you came on board in 2016 with the Trump campaign, what you've been up to since, and how you found yourself where you are right now.
Well, before I joined the Trump campaign in 2016, I was a political consultant for small campaigns all over the country, as well as for nonprofits in D.C. And at the time, I was a graduate student at Columbia. In the intervening time, I've been continuing to do general consulting for campaigns from sea to shining sea, and working again for nonprofits here in the DC area, working on center-right causes, everything from airlines to tax policy, et cetera. So how I got here, my forte is known to be voter data. It's a field I've worked in going all the way back to 1996 when I was on Haley Barbour's team at the Republican National Committee building the first national voter file. Back then, Republicans had a significant lead over Democrats in terms of technology. In the intervening years, I've worked for a lot of different organizations. I used to work for Frank Luntz. I worked for the nation's premier redistricting and election administration firm, Election Data Services, a contractor for the Census Bureau. So I understand elections, voter data, election administration, et cetera. And late last week, Thursday, I had some ideas, some methods that might be able to detect voter fraud. And I posted them on Twitter. I'm not really expecting much, but it started to get retweeted and people started to get excited about it. People were asking, where can I give money? And I set up a GoFundMe. And in 24 hours, we raised $220,000. But GoFundMe nuked it, and we didn't see a cent of that. All of it was refunded. So we set up another fund at givesendgo.com/voter integrity, and that has raised, I think right now it's just over $400,000.
Oh, wow.
We've gotten some direct contributions from other channels. And so I've stood up this project. Friday, it was just me. On Saturday, I brought my former deputy from the Trump campaign here, Vito Shabazz, to join and help me. A few days later, we picked up another gentleman, Camilo Sandoval. We picked up a few other Trump campaign staff veterans to join our team. We've got 4 of them now. I think we'll have a 5th soon, and a few other volunteers who've got the right skills that we're looking for. So we've got basically a whole headquarters here all of a sudden, trying to run down a comprehensive investigation into whether or not voter fraud took place on a very broad but aggressive level that delivers not charts or speculation or formulas or maps, but actual affidavits and declarations from people who were actually potentially victims of voter fraud. Mm-hmm. Because that's the only thing I think will really make a difference.
Right. Yeah, some concrete evidence rather than wild speculation. Rooted in
a living person or something. Right. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 analyses we're running concurrently across 6 states, and each of them is designed to produce irrefutable proof of something if we find something.
Right. And those 6 states, I assume, are Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, North Carolina, Georgia, and Arizona?
That is correct.
Okay. Well done.
No surprise to anyone who's been following the news closely recently. So what's the process like? I watch, you did a great, I encourage everyone to check out your interview with Jack Murphy, which you did this morning, and they can, use both of these as a resource. But how do you go about this sort of thing, and why does it cost so much money?
Well, I'll break it down. Initially, what I needed were the early voter and absentee data sets from the 6 states, an index of all the people who cast ballots early or absentee in the days leading up to and including up to basically the election, and absentee ballots that arrived election day or right shortly thereafter. That itself was quite expensive to obtain because in some cases it is publicly available or relatively easy available, but in others it's not. Then what was also expensive time-wise was taking that raw data and preparing it to be processed by our commercial vendor. We need a commercial vendor to make that usable and to provide us with certain analytical tools. That includes appending it with a date of birth, appending it with these voters with a phone number, appending it with whether or not they're in the National Change of Address database, and if they bump up and match to anybody in the Social Security Death Index or the master death file. Now, it's true that some of these things, like birthday, is sometimes already on the file, but in other cases it's not, or it's just partial, like the year they were born or the year and the month. And to get a good match on certain other things, we need, a full birth date, and that's really helpful to us. So the raw data and that enhancement together ate up $100,000 flat. What also is expensive is we are calling these people that we flagged as potential victims of voter fraud. And it starts off with a very broad funnel, the number of people that we would like to reach. Then it narrows to the number that we're able to get a cell phone match to. And then it narrows to the people that answer the phone, and then those who will answer the questions, and those who answer the questions in a way that results in them being flagged. When somebody's flagged, we have our in-house team follow up with them again on the phone, confirm what they told the call center, and prep them to sign a declaration. And also prep, and get them in the pipeline to the lawyers who need this information.
Right.
Thanks for this. It's very helpful. One question I have is, what for you would constitute a number significant enough to really feel like we've got a shot at this thing? And is it a number that it seems to you in your experience to be precedented? In other words, is this election as close as other elections that have been overturned? And how much of a lift is this for you and for the lawyers?
I think it's unfamiliar territory. And it's going to come down to, I guess, in some ways, to what the judge decides. One thing I want to make a point of is that we don't have to discover enough, say, potentially fraudulent ballots or disenfranchised Republican voters to overcome the margin of victory, at least based on precedent. We just need to establish that, I think, that there was some kind of systematic voter fraud or voter suppression, as it may be. And I think that historically, we've had an election turnover just this year because of voter fraud, a municipal election in New Jersey.
Right.
Not too long ago in Miami, a mayor's race was overturned because of voter fraud. Having a whole state in a presidential election overturned, which would probably be the most shocking judicial remedy, it just depends on how much evidence we discover, if we do discover any evidence at all. But I don't think we have to prove, enough ballots. We don't have to find enough to overcome the margin of victory. We just have to demonstrate that something was going on. And most of our methods are designed in such a way that if somebody was doing something, like somebody cast 100,000 illegal ballots, just theoretically, our system is designed, and the only way a system could be designed, so we're actually only, out of those 10,000, we're probably only going to detect a couple hundred. Those 100 would only, in all probability, occur if it was part of a much broader operation. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah, because the way you're sampling it, you think a couple hundred would be enough to suggest some wider problem.
I think so. I would make that case.
Yeah. Where does it stand in all your states?
Well, right now we've got on my chart, we are one of the tests we're running through. We're so far into 4 states with the phone program. We have 2 other programs that are basically phone center based, and they'll be starting tomorrow, although one of them's kind of already started. So we're still in the very early stages, the discovery phase. The reality is that the money that came from crowdfunding is not going to hit a bank account where I can spend it until Monday. So actually, I'm kind of juggling my phone vendors who are very reluctant to front money, and we've gotten a few loans and some additional outside money. But in theory, I would have spent through. I could easily have all $400,000 spent by Friday on these programs, and then we'll have some real results. But we still have to chase people down that responded in a way that raised a red flag, and get them to sign those declarations.
Are you up against a deadline? Do you have a particular date in mind that you're racing against?
The disappointing thing is that if somebody wanted to do this analysis and you could speculate as to who would be responsible. This kind of thing should have been done before Election Day because all of this data was available before Election Day. And ideally, it's really just me and people I've been pulling in. But I'm always acting as if we have to have it done yesterday. I'm moving as fast as we possibly can.
Yeah.
And there were some hard time sinks, like getting the data prepped for enhancement, then getting it after enhancement, analyzing it, and deciding who is what voters we should put into each program for follow-up for phone calls. And then we have several programs that don't actually require calls, but are very labor intensive for a data analyst. And sometimes we have to get additional data to do those analyses. But we're just racing as absolutely fast as we can.
Yeah, you mentioned the thing on everyone's mind, which is given the increasing, this year, of course, put it onto steroids, but given the increasing prevalence of mail-in voting, you'd think that folks on both sides of the political aisle would be attuned to this problem and would be proactively addressing it. Has that been the case much in recent years, or is this really going to become the new norm going forward rather than anyone really addressing it up till now?
The problem, do you guys remember what happened in Florida in 2000? Mm-hmm. Any recollection?
Yeah. Sure.
Okay. What happened in Florida was a very close election in a state that was pivotal. And in the process, we saw all kinds of problems in the election system in Florida. The way they maintained the voter lists, the way they conducted, on-site elections, whether or not they did ID work, whether or not IDs were checked, how absentee ballots were handled, how they counted ballots, whether a hanging Chad counted was have to have a pregnant Chad, and all these little details, right? Here's the dirty little secret. If there was ever such a pivotal election and as close an election in any state in this country, it would be that all over again. Mm. Every state has these tremendous systematic problems. It's across the board. The only thing that saved us from having constant Floridas is usually the margin of error and significance of the election aren't, it isn't something that the errors in the system could swing an election. System errors or potential voter fraud usually can't overcome the margins that we see in most states, in most elections. But here we are, the most important election, at least of my lifetime, many states with very close margins, very pivotal. So what's happening is all of the systematic problems with our electoral, the machinery of elections in this country are all being exposed and laid bare. They're not, you don't really notice the problems when somebody wins by 5 or 10 points. Right. But when it's like less than 1%, a couple thousand votes out of millions cast, here we are.
Right. So if we continue what we have recently, Obama maybe was a bit of an aberration, but given what we saw in 2016 and 2020, it could be the case that we have a bunch of these kind of knife's edge elections in a deeply divided country going forward. So this problem seems crying out for solution. It's interesting.
Yeah. It's not going to be election day. It's going to be election month.
Right. Right.
And do you foresee the techniques that you're using and developing here potentially just becoming part of the routine of elections? Is that a vision you have for the project, or is this much more kind of ad hoc, do what you can right now?
That's a funny question. Yeah. Let me put it in a very self-serving answer.
Go on.
For any campaign that hires me and gives me authority, it will be.
Right.
And not after election day, but before.
Right.
Yeah. So it sounded like, Matt, that you, by implication at least, you pretty much said it, across, even though we have a federalist system where all these states do things differently, they're all plagued by similar problems, right? It might be a different basket, but they all have these longstanding problems.
Yeah, some states worse than others. I actually organize pretty widespread poll watching in Virginia. And I got to say, as best I can tell in the areas I've seen, Virginia actually tends to do a pretty good job. Mm. But then I grew up in a place in South Carolina where for some reason, the heavy Democrat precincts take about 3 hours longer to count their votes, despite having the same exact equipment as everyone else. And, but put that in, that's the, I'm sort of throwing out that, maybe something nefarious is happening, but then there's massive amounts of incompetence out there, and again, I have walked into many, I've done redistricting and election administration in about a dozen states across this country. I've seen the problems. I had one election official in DC who's in charge of DC elections. We printed these posters showing the partisan splits in all of the precincts in Washington, D.C. And, you sort of explain the criteria with greater than and less than signs. Like, less than 5% or between 5 and 15%, just using greater than and less than, basic math signs.
Yeah.
She insisted we throw out all the posters telling and redo them with the greater than less than signs reversed because she thought they were reversed and she was our boss. So we actually produced a chart with them going the wrong way. And that was the person that was in charge of elections in Washington, D.C. It was later found that she faked her education credentials and was fired. But just, there are a lot of hardworking people in this field. My mother is a precinct manager, volunteer. But it's still government, right?
Yeah. No, of course. Yeah, with all the misaligned incentives and everything else. So did Florida, it seems like Florida did pretty well this cycle. Did they clean up considerably after the whole 2000 debacle? It seems like maybe they did.
I think that certain policies like counting the absentee ballots early certainly helps. But I will tell you that if Florida was as close this time as it was in 2000, we'd be right back there.
I see. Yeah. Is there any state that does it well, or just not badly?
Virginia. There are people who can better assess that than I can, but like as I've witnessed, Virginia seems to have their eye on the ball, and they seem to have pretty modern equipment, at least in the places I've identified.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen every area.
Yeah.
So I can't really attest to it, but I am pretty confident that most states, if it was razor close, it would lay bare all the weaknesses in the system. And that's fair. But the question is, okay, when those get revealed, what does the state legislature and state government do about it?
Right.
Right. That's the sort of next question. And the other big phenomenon is that this whole project of just trying to get to the bottom of this has been painted as some kind of anti-democratic cabal. Have you received that kind of pushback? Is that something that's come across your radar?
Right now, I don't think our little organization that we're doing here has gotten enough scrutiny or attention yet to attract that kind of attention. And part of the way we're avoiding that is that we're just being completely transparent about what we're doing. We are not alleging vote fraud. We're not throwing out conspiracy theories or anything. We're just saying, look, we've run analysis on this data. This is hard data. This is not speculation. We've called people. This many people told us that they did not cast a ballot, yet they're marked as casting a ballot in the state. So it's very concrete. But in general, the right has always, and anybody, not just the right, anybody interested in good government, ballot security, has always had a tremendous uphill battle against Democrats. You're accused of voter suppression. Right. You're accused of, you're basically accused of being anti-democratic if you insist on any kind of ballot security like voter ID or some kind of stricter scrutiny for absentee or remote voting. I was poll watching a few months ago, a municipal election in Alabama. I didn't have a campaign sign on me. I was just dressed in a shirt and tie, pants, and I was just standing watching the voters pass their ID cards up to the poll workers to be checked in. And somebody complained that I was intimidating voters.
Yeah.
Now, no voter knew that I was working for a campaign or I was a poll watcher. As far as anybody knew, I worked for the elections. We all had masks on.
Right.
But the willingness to scream voter intimidation or vote suppression, it's a little bit like crying wolf. And the left does it all the time. And it's particularly troubling hard to get reforms done in places where Democrats control the process, because that is the process that got them elected and keeps them in power.
Right.
So getting them to reform it, what incentive do they also have to do that?
Yeah. Yeah. And I've been saying recently too, I think I said on our last podcast last week, if you had Republican machines in crucial states that have been controlling them for decades, they'd be corrupt and as well. It's sort of it's an endemic problem of democratic politics and party machines whose power comes to look to them like a birthright after they've held it,
right.
And passed it on in a way to their fellow Democrats or fellow Republicans. It just happens to be the case that in places like Milwaukee and Detroit, and Philadelphia, they've been under Democratic control for a long time.
Yeah, and I think in some of these states, it's incumbent on the sovereign state to impose the necessary reforms. And it's not, and I've said this a lot, it's not just a matter of stomping out voter fraud, but to eliminate theoretically how it could take place so that citizens have some confidence that the election results are honest, that they're clean, because about as dangerous as an illegitimate election is the suspicion widespread of an illegitimate election.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely toxic to a democracy like our own.
Yeah. And I think it's especially the case, too, when we have such deep divisions right now. That's a time you need more confidence in the system than ever, because the outcomes people see as more and more antithetical to their vision of the Constitution or the common good. So it's really a terrible recipe, and it could be, and we hope it's not, a spiraling one that will lead to civic unrest and everything else.
Right. I mean, because if people don't think the election's legitimate, the way they start to behave, and I mean, countries break up over this stuff.
Yeah, and no country is immune from that kind of strife. Well, we're just about out of time. I know you're very busy, but you just stood this up, so maybe you don't have a great answer. But where should people go if they want to learn more? We should encourage anyone who's listening to this that wants to help with your project. Where should they go to get that done?
Well, to support the project again, I would like to be able to make calls and outreach to between 1.5 and 2 million voters. That's very expensive. We're probably going to end up, the budget for this fully funded would be around $1 million. We're right around 400,000 right now, plus some additional funds that have come in independently. What I'd ask is for people to contribute at givesendgo.com/voter integrity. I am using my Twitter feed to publish our findings. It's at twitter.com/Matt Braynard. That's MATT, B as in Bravo, RAY, N as in November, ARD as in Delta. And in addition to publicizing these, I can say that we have been coordinating with the victory teams in Georgia and Pennsylvania and their lawyers. So we're setting up pipelines to get our findings to the people who can do something about it. And we're reaching out to other states as well. So, if you want to help, we'd love a contribution, or share our project with others who might be able to contribute.
Great. Yeah. I encourage all our listeners to check that out and support if they want to. And Matt, thanks for your time, and thanks for all this hard work.